Good afternoon again. I hope you can hear me well and you see the slides. I'm very happy to welcome you to this second webinar of the ENSMOV PLUS project, supported by the LIFE program. And this webinar is also included in the program of the Sustainable Energy Days. So today we will discuss the implication of the new EPBD, Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, through the lens of the energy saving obligations to member states, the Article 8 of the new EED. And for that, we have the pleasure to welcome 4 speakers and panelists: Samuel Thomas from the Regulatory Assistance Project, Joost Hartlief from RVO, Natalie Markova from the Czech Ministry of Industry and Trade, and Edita Nowak from the European Commission. As you see, we have quite a rich agenda, so I will start right away with a short introduction about the project and a few information about the background on buildings and how Article 8 of the EED also deal with building. So myself, I'm Jean-Sébastien Broc from IEECP, the Institute for European Energy and Climate Policy. We have the pleasure to coordinate the ENSMOV PLUS project. As I said, that's co-funded by the LIFE program. And we started about 1.5 years ago. We are reaching midterm of our project. What is this project about? That's to support the implementation of the energy saving obligations. So formerly Article 7, now Article 8 of the Energy Efficiency Directive. The aim is to provide support to all stakeholders involved in this implementation, so especially public authority and agencies, but also energy companies, ESCOs, all market players of energy efficiency markets. And we cover the whole policy cycle from the design of the policy until the evaluation and the redesign when needed. Consumption includes 14 partners from 12 countries with a mix of public authorities and agencies, but also associations of stakeholders and research labs and think tanks. Why we think experience sharing, so the core of the project is experience sharing in various ways, and this webinar is also part of it. And why do we think it's essential? Here you have an overview of the results of the previous obligation period, 2014-2020, set by the EED. And you see that the rate of achievement among member states was quite diverse. And so we are quite sure that we can learn from each other to achieve higher targets and better results. So what's on from our side? We have a platform where you can find many resources, and this month we have added three new resources: the report on the updated report on the implications of the 5455 package that will be presented by Sam in a minute. A new set of examples that deal with studies assessing energy saving potentials, both at EU and national level, and the summary of the session done at the BF conference last year about how to evaluate energy savings from behavioral measures. On the platform, you can also find country pages with information per country. That's not always completely up to date for all countries right now, but it's an ongoing process. We try to update that as fast as possible, and there will be a new snapshot of energy efficiency obligation scheme and alternative measures prepared by the end of this year, incorporating the new information from the final NSP update due by the end of June. In terms of activities, we have also two more activities next month in June. Next Wednesday, we have another webinar organized by the ODCMUR project that will deal with the topic of energy poverty. that's still possible to register. And the week after, we'll be present at the ECEEE summer study, where we will present part of the project and some results of our analysis, and you can meet us there in person. Coming back to the topic of today and the role of buildings in the energy savings obligation, you have here some graphs about energy savings achieved in the previous period, 2014-2020 on your left, and on the right, the most recent data about the savings achieved in 2021, so the first year of the new period, and the distribution per sector. The thing is that you see cross-cutting measures as the main sector because the granularity of the data reported by member state does not distinguish savings per sector when it is a cross-cutting measure, and obviously the cross-cutting measures bring most of the savings. It can be energy efficiency obligation scheme, can be energy taxes, can be voluntary agreements as well. All these type of measure policies are usually cross-cutting, and so then it might be useful to try to disentangle a bit more the data. So we try to do that when screening the policy measures reported by member states in their National Energy and Climate Progress Report last year. So the 2023 report was about results achieved in 2021. That amounts to close to 350 measures reported. And you can see that if we try to differentiate them, whether they are completely focused on buildings, whether they deal with buildings and other sectors or end uses, or if they are not dealing with buildings at all, then that's almost one third, rather equally distributed in terms of number of measures. But again, you see that the cross-cutting aspect is still there when you look at the distribution of savings, because 60% of the savings come from the measures that deals with both buildings and other aspects, and where it's not possible from the data reported to in the NECPRs to know more from that. However, looking at some of the main measures in this field, we can realistically say, that energy savings in buildings probably represent a bit more than half, if not more, than the savings achieved in 2021. And here, when I mention savings in buildings, that's the ones related to building envelope and heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. So let's mostly related to space heating and to a lesser extent to domestic hot water. But not from appliances, for example, or lighting, unless lighting is covered directly as part of a deep renovation, for example. If we go more into the measures that are specifically focused on buildings, so as I said, that's about 1/3 of the measures notified to Article 8. And again, that's rather fairly distributed between measures that are focused on residential buildings or measures that are focused on non-residential buildings. And then you have about 1/4 that is cross-cutting, so covering all types of buildings. Out of these measures, a bit less than half have even a more specific scope. So you have measures, for example, focused on public buildings, on multifamily buildings, on single-family houses, or and let's say just a minority of measures that deal specifically with new buildings. And I guess Sam will say, will explain why in a minute. Then in terms of policy instruments, I guess that's not a surprise for you to see that when dealing with Article 8, most of the measures are related to financing schemes. Because also the, let's say, more cross-cutting measures are now not represented here. So in energy efficiency obligation schemes, for example, or taxation measures are not here. That's it for the introduction. As I said, we are reaching the midterm of the project, so that's also a good time to get some feedback from the stakeholders. So we will share the link of the survey in the chat, and if you can take 5 minutes after this webinar or later this week to answer it, that would be really useful to us. That's all for the introduction, and now I'm pleased to give the word to Sam Thomas about the latest report on the Fit for 55 package. Sam, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Jean-Sébastien. As JS said, I'm going to present our most recent report to appear on the ENSMOV PLUS platform. And I'm going to focus on the specific part of it today, which is the implications of the EPBD on member states' energy savings obligations. And there we go. So there's the report, and there's the link to the platform. We originally published a first edition of the report in July 2023. And we were going to update it, we felt around November, December in 2023, after the publication of the final EPBD text. But of course, as we know, that the negotiations dragged on a little bit for the EPBD, but now they're finalized. We have a new EPBD, and that's why we've now published our update paper, which includes the new provisions in the EPBD that are relevant to policymakers that are looking to make policies and implement them to meet their EED energy savings obligations. If you read the paper, you'll see that there is one directive that is still open. That's the Energy Taxation Directive, and we do list the provisions or the draft, the proposed provisions in that, but we didn't think it was worth waiting for that directive to be finally negotiated before we published our update. So we're going to focus today just on the interaction between the EPBD and the Energy Efficiency Directive. But if you look at the report, there are various other elements of the web of new EU laws are covered in the publication. So find out, for example, how the changes to the ETS interact with the energy savings obligation, for example. Then just a quick reminder before we get onto the EPBD of what the main changes are to the EED energy savings obligation. There are many, but the three main ones are, firstly, that there are more energy savings required. So the ambition has increased relative to the 2018 directive, and the 2021 to 2030 energy savings obligation is now roughly about 44% more ambitious than what it was in the 2018 directive. And we can see that the annual savings rate required increases as the decade goes on, so that once we get to 2030, or indeed 2028, the rate is up at 1.9% final energy savings per annum. So the scene is set for even more ambition in the post-2030 era. Secondly, the energy savings obligation is aligned with the just and inclusive energy transition elements of the Green Deal and the Fit for 55 package, and that's because there is now a share of savings required to be achieved among priority groups, which are to be defined by member states, but the size of the ring fence depends upon the extent of energy poverty in the member states, as defined by member states in their NECPs, or as calculated using an arithmetic average of indicators available across Europe related to the inability to keep homes warm, arrears on utility bills, the population living in poorly repaired buildings, and the at-risk of poverty rate. And then the third main area is that the obligation has been aligned with climate goals through the ineligibility of energy savings from fossil fuel technologies, which already in 2024 means that energy savings in buildings from direct fossil fuel combustion technologies promoted by newly implemented policy measures are no longer eligible. And then from 2026, any policy measures subsidising fossil fuel boilers in the residential sector will become ineligible, as well as any newly implemented policy measures that regard the direct combustion of fossil fuel technologies. So as we will see, as we go through the webinar, these three changes are complemented by changes made to the EPBD as well. So broadly, the two directives are very synergistic, but at the level of the savings that can be counted towards member states' energy savings obligations, changes to EU law can have two countervailing impacts. And the next slide just broadly shows what those two impacts are. So first of all, there are these synergies. So we've seen that from a strategic perspective, they complement each other. And that complementarity means that new policy measures can help member states, or in policy measures that are more ambitious can help member states meet their, meet the requirements of both the EED and the EPBD. But there are a minority of changes, and a very small minority in the EPBD, which mean that the baseline of energy savings from EU policy measures from EU law has increased. So the EPBD by itself will lead to new energy savings that then diminishes the savings that can be counted by member states from their national policy measures. And we'll come on to that in a moment, because as we'll see, there are basically three synergistic areas in the EPBD and one area where the baseline has increased. And I'll just go through those four areas now. So starting with the synergies and what is in the EPBD. So Article 9 of the EPBD requires member states to establish minimum energy performance standards for non-residential buildings to ensure that the least efficient 16% of the stock are no longer in that worst performing group by 2030. And that is then extended to cover a bigger proportion by 2033. So clearly action will need to be taken before 2030 in order to meet that requirement by 2030. In the residential sector, member states must establish national trajectories for the progressive renovation of the stock, ensuring that the average primary energy use of the whole stock decreases by 16% by 2030 and 20 to 22% by 2035. And crucially, the renovation efforts must focus on the worst performing buildings, with at least 55% of that decrease achieved in the worst 43% of the stock. So that's what it says in Article 9 EPBD, a big focus on existing buildings and improving their energy performance. And of course, that has some major synergies with the energy savings obligation, where member states have got to make progressively more energy savings, and specifically recognizing the need for national policy measures to overcome the various market failures and barriers to building renovation. Annex 5 of the EED, it anticipated the EPBD recast or revision, explicitly adding a derogation for policy aimed at meeting minimum energy performance standards in existing buildings. But that explicit mention of minimum energy performance standards also extends to the national trajectories, because there was a pre-existing derogation for energy savings from building renovation in the EED energy savings obligation. So basically, it can all count as long as the policy measures meet the standard requirements around materiality and eligibility in the EED. So some real synergies there. And I guess just to put that into context, if you look at the 2040 impact assessment, the 2040 target impact assessment that the EU Commission published earlier this year, you can see that in the middle of this chart here, we've got the building sector emissions declining rapidly between 2020 and 2030, and then decreasing to virtually nil by 2040, by which time we're only expecting some residual emissions in district heating systems that will have to then decarbonize by the 2050 deadline. So essentially, if we're going to meet our climate targets and our effort sharing regulation targets, then there needs to be a lot of action in the building sector during the current decade. And both of these two elements of the Fit for 55 package should help member states to focus action on renovating existing buildings. The second synergy is around action to tackle energy poverty. And there are three areas that I thought I'd just highlight. So first of all, Article 3 EPBD requires national building renovation plans to include various aspects related to measurement and quantification and definitions. Article 9 EPBD, as we've already discussed, has this focus on the worst performing buildings, worst performing homes. And as we know, the energy performance of buildings is intimately related to the energy poverty rate. And then Article 17 EPBD requires member states to target financial incentives as a priority on vulnerable households, people affected by energy poverty, and people living in social housing in accordance with Article 24 EED. So here we've got the EPBD referring to the EED, and well, that synergy is quite clear. Article 8 EED, as we've already discussed, has this requirement for a share of member states' energy savings obligations to be delivered among, it's a slightly different wording, but people affected by energy poverty, vulnerable customers, people in low income households, and where applicable, people living in social housing. So a very, very clear synergy there with both the EPBD and the EED having this requirement to target funds, those scarce resources, where they're needed most. Then the third synergy looks at the climate change alignment. And in the EPBD, we have Article 17, which includes a deadline of the 1st of January 2025, by which member states shall not provide any financial incentives for the installation of standalone boilers powered by fossil fuels. And there are some exceptions. And then if we look at Annex 2 EPBD, this requires the template for the structure of national building renovation plans, which has to be submitted to the Commission by the end of next year, to include mandatory reporting of policies and measures to decarbonise heating and cooling, with a view to the complete phase out of fossil fuel boilers by 2040. So again, the EPBD is clearly signalling the way forward in terms of phasing out fossil fuel boilers, and certainly removing policy incentives for their installation. And of course, that has a nice synergy with what I've already described in the EED, where, as I said, there's this progressive ineligibility of energy savings that can be counted towards Article 8 energy savings obligations from fossil fuel combustion technologies. Then just to finish with the area where we might see the baseline increasing from EU law, Article 7 and Article 11 EPBD tighten the minimum requirements for new buildings to the zero emission buildings level. And this reduces the scope for savings from national building codes and incentives for new builds that, I don't know, let's say a passive house, for example, that go beyond EU law. But as Jean-Sébastien said, there are very, very few policy measures that are currently being reported related to new builds, mainly because already the EU law was really quite strict with the nearly zero energy buildings requirement. And the other thing to say, and we can see that, so Article 11 is basically saying that the new thresholds are at least 10% lower than the threshold for total primary energy use in the nearly zero energy buildings requirement. The other thing to say is that in Article 7, the dates are towards the end of the period, and unlike the building renovation provisions, with the new build, of course, they only come into play at the point at which the provisions take effect, and that's 2030 for all new buildings, and an earlier date of 2028 for new buildings owned by public bodies. So there we are. That's my brief summary of the interactions between the new provisions of the EPBD and the EED energy savings obligation. You can contact me there, stomas@raponline.org, if you've got any questions. And with that, I will pass back to Jean-Sébastien.
Thanks a lot, Sam. I think that was very useful to get this overview of the interactions between the directives, and also a reminder about the main changes in Article 8. It shows that I will see the positive interactions between the two directives, especially to boost savings in existing buildings. And that's why today we invited to get speakers to share their experience on that, because one thing is to say that there are potentials and synergies, but another thing is to achieve these savings and to put policies in place to get this done. And to start, we will travel to the Netherlands. I'm pleased to invite on stage Joost Hartlief. So you are a senior advisor at RVO, the Netherlands enterprise agency, and today you will share with us some insight about the recent Dutch measures on energy requirements for offices. Joost, the floor is yours.
Well, that's absolutely correct. Thank you very much, Jean-Sébastien. Thank you for the opportunity today to share the Dutch experiences with our label C, mandatory energy label.
We can see your slide, that's good.
Yeah, thank you. Our experiences with our mandatory energy label C for existing offices. Samuel explained the provisions in the EPBD Article 4, the maps for non-residential buildings in 2030. We have maps for non-residential buildings for offices, and the date was 1st of January 2023. And I will tell you about it today. This is the outline of my presentation. I will tell you about the introduction of our Label C obligation for offices. I will tell you about our level of compliance that we achieved. I'll tell you a little bit about estimate I found from the University of Maastricht for the energy savings. I will explain how enforcement was organized, and very important for the maps in the EPBD 4, I will tell about the lessons that we have learned so far. So first, the introduction. These are some news articles. They're in Dutch. They're not intended for you to read. Just on the top of your screen, you might notice a date. It's the 28th of November 2016. So that's the first time that we told the world through news articles that we were going to make a mandatory label C for all existing Dutch offices on the 1st of January 2023. So that's a little over 6 years ahead of time, which is important in the lessons that we learned. Formally, the law came into effect in 2018, so that's 4 years ahead of time. Looks a little bit like the schedule that we have now for the maps for non-residential buildings in the EPBD 4. It's just a little bit similar. The rationale, of course, we had energy saving targets in 2015, 2016. So that was the rationale as well. But a different rationale behind our obligation was the return on investment. That on average, these are really old numbers from that time, from about 2015. But this was the rationale. The return on investment on average was very, very good. On average, about 5 years. So now we jump ahead about 6 years in time. And where do we stand right now? It's now 2024. All Dutch offices should be label C by now, and not all of them are. But we do see a green graph that's growing and growing and growing. Green is all the energy labels A, B, and C, and the red line are the energy labels D, E, F, and G. So we see a big, big rise in green energy labels. And to put that into numbers, our compliance where we stand right now, we think we have about 100,000 offices. We think, I say, because we don't know for sure. About 60,000, a little over 60,000 of these offices have to comply. There are exemptions if you're in a monument, if you have a smaller office, or if your office is subsidiary to your shop, you might not have to might not have to comply. So we think a little over 60,000 offices have to comply in the Netherlands, and the estimate from last month is that 63% formally comply, they have a label C or better. 9% definitely do not comply because they have a label D or even worse, and 29% do not have an energy label registered yet. So formally they don't comply because you have to have a registered label C, but we know that many of those are energy efficient enough, and we know that by, for instance, the year they were built. So we did not achieve 100% compliance, which of course should be the target if you introduce a law, and a law should be abided, which raises the question, is this obligation a success? We'll come to that later. Energy savings. I found an estimate of the research from the University of Maastricht. They estimate that we have a little over 19 kilotons less CO2 emissions by offices between 2018 and 2024, which is mostly natural gas, as you might know. We found in Holland we found a big pocket of natural gas halfway last century in the province of Groningen. So all our homes and our non-residential buildings used to be heated by natural gas, and we are moving away from natural gas at the moment. But for a large part, this over 90 kilotons less CO2 emissions is an autonomous development. As we saw other building types improve as well. So the university made an estimate that about 16 kilotons of the emissions reduction can be attributed to our label C obligation, which amounts to about 9 million cubic meters of natural gas. Enforcement. In the Netherlands, we did enforcement by municipalities because the label C obligation was introduced through our building code, and that automatically makes the municipality the enforcer. First step of enforcement by municipalities would be to write office owners and office users to create awareness. This was done in 2022. Also from the Ministry of the Interior, my colleagues sent about tens of thousands of letters to offices just to make them aware that this obligation is there. We think you do not comply. We think you have to comply. You should start thinking about complying with your energy label C obligation. Second step for the municipality in enforcement would be just to start a discussion, maybe issue a warning. This started in the beginning of last year. First step would be a fine. Municipalities have the opportunity to give fines. And these are not one-time fines, but repetitive fines. If you do not comply, then you would get a fine over and over and over again. And the fourth and last step would be that municipalities actually have the possibility to close the office, which of course would be very, very, very bad for both user and owner of the office. This hasn't been done as far as I know, but it has been a little bit of a threat for some. Coming to the lessons learned, first for building owners. Well, we know now that label C in offices can often be reached with quite simple measures. LED lighting, maybe a little bit more efficient central heating system or natural gas. We also know that financing for the real old buildings, especially when you might need a more expensive measure like insulation, and if you might be in an economic more backward region of the country, then financing the step to label C can be problematic, really problematic. It's about I saw an estimate, it's just 1 or 2% of the Dutch offices for which it is really a problem. We know now that big offices comply very often, smaller offices comply less often, and we have learned that it is very, very important to start communication early, especially for smaller investors and individual building owners. For the label C obligation for offices, we started 6 years ahead, and we did not get 100% compliance. There were some building owners who anticipated on no enforcement. They thought there's not going to be a fine, there's not going to be any enforcement. So we communicated about enforcement quite a lot. And another lesson that we learned is that a lot of building owners are waiting for the last moment to take their measures, and we warned for scarcity of contractors' buildings and that prices of renovations might rise. Lessons learned from the tenant's perspective. Well, we learned now that tenants have a higher standard for comfort and sustainability than they used to do, so that meant an extra incentive. This also meant that the split incentive was less important than we originally thought. The split incentive, of course, between the building owner and the tenant. And we also learned that the potential penalty of closing the office, which hasn't happened as far as I know, gave both owner and tenant a motivation to comply. That was a shared incentive. Slide which I would not thought I'd be presenting if you had asked me 3 or 4 years ago, is the lesson that we learned about the role of financiers. They played a way bigger role than we anticipated. They also communicated with office owners about the obligation, and they were very often, almost always, unwilling to finance transactions or deals that did not comply with the label C obligation. So they had a way bigger role than we thought. And from a national government, of course, I work for the national government. Going too fast. We see that autonomous development was bigger than we expected. Other building types with no obligation improved significantly as well, but we did see a way more energy labels registered within the offices sector than other non-residential building types. And a very important lesson for us as well is that the definitions are hard, and which means that sometimes it's hard to determine, does an office have to comply? Of course, when you have a single building, which is an office and it's big, we know that you have to comply. But if there is office within a shop or a larger building with shops, offices, and residential buildings, then it might become very complex, not just for us as a national government, also for the municipality as an enforcer, and also for the building owner, them or herself. So we made all kinds of solutions, infographics, help desk, and presentations to try to explain the complexity and how to figure out whether or not your office had to comply. Then going to the enforcement by municipalities, we learned quite a few lessons there as well. They have quite some challenges on their own. There is a lack of knowledge within municipalities, also referring to the complexity sometimes in some buildings. There is a lack of knowledge within these municipalities. They have a shortage of capacity, and they have to decide on what to enforce, because they have other things to enforce as well. And then sometimes the label C obligation for offices we saw got limited political priority. And especially that fourth and last step, closing offices, is deemed often to be too harsh. And the last problem that municipalities have to face is that their own offices sometimes do not comply, and then it's very hard to enforce offices of normal offices in your municipality to comply. From a national perspective, about 2 years ago, we gave the municipality additional financial resources just for the enforcement of label C. And of course, then we communicated about that to building owners. Be aware, enforcement is going to happen, and we gave municipalities additional funds for enforcement. And all these lessons learned are, of course, very important at this moment where we are thinking about how to implement the maps that Samuel discussed, the maps for non-residential buildings, these 16% worst performing non-residential buildings that have to be improved by 2030. So coming to my conclusions, we achieved significant additional energy savings. We are still making progress towards 100% compliance on the label Safe for offices. And we learned quite a few valuable lessons for future maps in the non-residential sector. So do I personally consider that label say obligation for offices a success? Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Jean-Sébastien.
Oh, thanks to you. Yes, I think that was very, very interesting to share this experience. There are many lessons that you mentioned that are good to note. I have just picked two of them. The time needed between the first adoption of the legislation and the actual enforcement, so it does not happen overnight. So there is a need to anticipate this process, and also a need to anticipate the possible pressure it makes on the market for innovations or works. As you mentioned, that okay, if when you reach the deadline, obviously the demand for building professionals will increase, so that should be anticipated as well. I remind everyone that you can use either, so you have two ways to put questions. There is a Q&A panel that you should see in the top of your screen, or the chat, so feel free to ask questions, and we will have time after the last presentation for a panel discussion, so we can take a question then. So we will move now from the Netherlands to the Czech Republic, and also from non-residential buildings to residential buildings. So this way we have quite a comprehensive, or maybe not comprehensive, but at least a diverse view of what can be done in different sectors in different ways. And after speaking about a regulation, now we will go to what is the main type of measures that you have seen that is reported to Article 8 AED, financing financial incentives. And I'm very pleased to welcome to the stage Natalie Markova, head of the Energy Efficiency Unit of the Czech Ministry for Industry and Trade, that will tell us a bit about their green savings program. Natalie, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Sébastien. Thank you very much for the introduction, and greetings from a very rainy Prague. I hope you are having a wonderful day. And as you have heard, my name is Natalie, and I work at the Ministry of Industry and Trade here in Czech Republic. Let's get straight to the presentation, so we have more time for the questions and discussions later. So I have put the name of my presentation as the Czech Republic and its ED and EPBD synergies with focus on Article 8, and of course, particularly on the Green Savings Program. Sorry. So as for the outline, I will start with the energy savings obligation, then move to the new green savings program, then talk about a bit about overcoming the barriers you need to support really any subsidy program. And then I will briefly touch upon the EPBD and ED synergies, but I think Samuel did a great job, so it will be very quick overview, because it wouldn't be a Czech presentation without a bit of a complaint on our side. So let's move to the energy savings obligation. We have learned in the Czech Republic the hard way of how difficult it is really to fulfill the obligation under Article 7, because as you could see from the presentation earlier on, the Czech Republic did not fulfill the Article 7 obligation during the last period. There were several issues we had to deal with during this particular period, mainly because of our decision to focus really on investment measures. We have not used taxes nor regulation that much. On hindsight, we do not really regret this decision because it worked for us in a bit different way because we have had the time to perfect our subsidies program, and that's also partially why I am here today. So we did make a lot of projects happen. So really the real savings we are, at least I think, trying to achieve via Article 7/8 right now. So the investment measures, that means subsidy scheme and financial measures, in the time period of 2014 to 2020 accounted for 70% of our obligation. However, so the way the obligation is counted, even though we have achieved 95% of the new yearly savings, we did not achieve the cumulative savings where really the obligation lies. That was mainly because a lot of projects happened in the second period of the previous period, and the accumulation didn't do much for us or anything at all, really. What we had to change right now in this current period was that we decided to utilize regulation a lot more. So when I said in the previous, we have used investment measures for 70%, right now investment measures make 45%. A lot of it is regulation. Mainly because our obligation for the Czech Republic got bigger more than 3 times. Where in the previous period we had to do 200 petajoules approximately. Right now we have to do close to 700 petajoules cumulative. So that's quite a rise, I would say. Let's move to the buildings really, because that's the main thing we are talking about here. They are cornerstones of every energy efficiency, I think, measure or well, what we are trying to really achieve, right? Lowering the consumption. So buildings is the obvious way to do it. We have made available 8.9 billion euros. It is assumed that it's till 2030. And we estimate that the savings will be around 40 petajoules of new savings. Of course, we cannot do that on cumulative because we don't know when they are going to happen. We hope as soon as possible. It can be more than 40 petajoules, of course, of new savings, but we are trying always to be more critical about when we are setting out these targets. Because anything can happen, as we saw with the pandemic. So the measures or focusing areas within the buildings in Czech Republic, mainly heating and insulation. That I count their windows as well, change of windows. So these are 2 really big parts of what we are trying to do. Huge importance we put on technical assistance. I will be talking about that a bit later on, and of course awareness rising. So let's move to the main topic, let's say, of my presentation. This was a brief introduction, and that is the new Green Savings Program. It is not here at the Ministry of Industry and Trade. It is administered by our lovely colleagues at the Ministry of Environment, and it is running continuously since 2009. That's a long time. However, we find it very useful because everybody knows this program. It works organically, really, I would say. So we didn't really stop the program and then started it anew. It really evolves every time. We are trying to perfect something. So colleagues are trying to make it always better, as I have mentioned, more approachable, more result quality oriented as well. That's where we come in as someone who is responsible for the energy performance of buildings in Czech Republic. So really we are pushing for stricter requirements concerning the technical aspects of how the program operates, or rather the outcomes of those renovations. So this program, the New Green Savings Program, is focused on residential sector. So everyone who owns a residential building, I think that is important, knows where to go, because since 2009 there is this program when they want to invest, of course, into the energy efficiency measures. So mainly it is focused on single-family houses and apartment buildings, where we have a lot of apartment buildings. The allocation currently is 3 billion euros, and there are 7 open calls, because then you can really choose what you want to focus on. The range of applicants is still expanding. It is focused on economically active citizens, as well as senior citizens, low-income households. It is focused on social housing as well. Even churches can apply, non-profit organizations, municipalities, of course, it's a big part of that. I have mentioned several really different types of recipients. The way it is financed, well, basically, when you come there, and the way it is financed really depends on who you are when you're asking for the money. So the low-income households receive, for example, the money beforehand, so in advance. Not so the economically active. They get those money after the fact, because we are presuming that they do not need the money immediately, let's say. There are also very administrative difficulties when you are, of course, giving money for something which is to be done. As for the bonuses, I have mentioned at the lowest bullet point, at the bullet point at the bottom, it is extra money you get when you're combining multiple energy savings measures. So that's how we are trying to push for, if you are doing something, do more of it. So, for example, the combination of insulation and changing your heat source to heat pump, you get 400 euros. If you add some kind of mitigation to that as well, for example, concerning saving rainwater, you can get even 800 euros. So the more measures you do, the better bonus system, basically, you can get. So it's a motivational feature. Here we are going back to the Article 8 and all the requirements we have to fulfill. So on the left side, you have, this is representing the new savings achieved. So everything, those are the measures which have already happened. We are using measured savings, and sometimes scaled savings are used, but really most of those are measured. On the right side, you can see the number of realized projects, or implemented projects. What is very good is that the New Green Savings Program has a very high success rate. So from 243,000 applications, 230,000 were realized, and we are talking about, you can see 2019 to 2023. But what you can see from the graphs is that, again, we have a very slow uptake at the beginning of the period, which is, and that was the main problem the Czech Republic had previous period, even though for different reasons. Right now it is due to COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, when you have a cumulative savings, it represents a huge problem, because, of course, the earlier you do that, the more savings you have from it. So it is a counting exercise. And my main complaint will be because of the fact that we have cumulative savings and not really focusing on the new savings. I promised overcoming barriers and focus on technical assistance, really. In the Czech Republic, we are right now in the middle of a big reform of technical assistance. So we want to focus on the whole society. As everybody likes to say, no one should be left behind, basically with a bottom-up approach. So I mentioned a new green savings program is trying to focus on senior citizens as well. However, at the same time, everything is starting to be digital, and some people may be disadvantaged by that. So we have people who are going to senior citizens and helping them with the whole administrative process, creating the bank identity they need and these aspects, so they are not, so to say, left behind. Everything must be easily accessible, and we are trying to use less qualified people, but still people who know what they are talking about, to spread the word about what people can ask for, but not really burdening the high quality professionals, because we need them to make those projects and to make those projects high quality. So in the end, we have a lot of high quality renovations. A part of that whole reform is also a tool for renovation passports. We are working on implementation of the EPBD already, and of course awareness raising campaign shall be part of that as well. I think I can talk about a lot more, but we don't have the time for it right now. As I mentioned, and this is my last slide, Samuel, I think, did a wonderful job talking about the EPBD and EED synergies. Both heavily rely on buildings, as I have mentioned before. There is a huge push for technical assistance. Both directives have articles about one-stop shops. And really, if you want to have high quality renovations, having a subsidy program is not enough. You need to have the supporting structure. So you are not giving money for projects that are, well, basically changing the windows and doing it not very well, or putting a heat pump to a building which is perhaps not really, I would say, heat pump ready. So as for the Article 8, that's my main complaint about the EED, that is the administration of Article 8 and Annex 5. It is a huge administrative burden, especially because of materiality and additionality, which is good that for the buildings, additionality we don't have to really consider, but when you're changing the heat pump, or changing the sources, that's something you have to consider it. As for the Article 9 of the EPBD, that's the minimum manager performance requirements that Joost was talking earlier about, we had, because I was during the negotiations there, we had a huge discussions about this particular thing, because we didn't want the maps to be barrier for the energy savings to be counted under EED. So we wanted to make sure, because of course, as I think Samuel, sorry, was it, who said that if it is European measure, European obligation, then you cannot really count it. So we were trying to approach it so that the maps is nationally set rules. It's not the European set rules. So we were not entirely sure if it would fall even under the derogation the EED has. So we just wanted to make that clear from the early on. And that is all for me. And thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Natalie. It was, I would say, really energizing to see the ramp up of the results, and that's similar to the success that Joost presented before. I think that's very welcome in these days where good news are scarce, to see positive feedback and that we can achieve some good results. I've noted just before we enter in the discussion, and we welcome also Edita Nowak to the panel. I've noted a few points from your presentation, the importance to have a good brand, and you mentioned it, the program has a long history and there is no need to change completely, especially for the communication. The importance of quality, having requirements that you fine-tune over time, which is complemented by your point of the need for a supporting structure like one-stop shop, and also as highlighted in the ED and EPBD, the importance of trying that no one is left behind, and including provisions so that everyone can benefit from the schemes. I think that was a very important point among all that you presented. Before we come back, there have been already a few questions on both presentations. Starting now, that I welcome Edita to the panel. So Edita is a policy officer at the Directorate General for Energy at the European Commission, and she, as part of other activities, she's leading the work on Article 8 EED. And we have seen in Nathalie's presentation that, okay, the implementation of this article is not so simple. We've seen from the presentation by Sam that many new things have been introduced with the new EED. So I guess that some of the stakeholders may be wondering if there would be a new guidance note or some support for them to implement this new version of Article 8.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation to attend this seminar. And well, maybe today is full of good news, so I will start with those. Indeed, for the past year, the European Commission has been working on the guidance notes for different articles of the Energy Efficiency Directive recast for those that underwent the major changes, and of course including Article 8, 9, 10. At the end of last year, the Commission has published the guidance note for Article 30, and I'm glad to almost officially announced that the guidance note on Article 8, 9, 10 is in the pipeline, it's on the way, and everything going fine. It should be published next week, hopefully early next week. For those who are checking Commission websites and Commission registry, the guidance note is already there in the Commission documents registry, but the document is not there yet because the publication office is still publishing it, preparing it for the publication. But yes, it is on the way. If I may, very quickly about the guidance note before we immediately jump to read it early next week. Just a few main elements. So the new guidance note on Article 8, 9, 10 does not repeal the existing guidance note for Article 7 EED dating back from October 2019. This is because the architecture and the basic principles of Article 7.8 have not undergone the significant changes, and notably the calculation methodologies still under Annex 5 remain largely unchanged. Therefore, the new guidance note focuses only on the new elements brought by Article 8, 9, 10 of EED recast. It's short, concise documents of around 30 pages, focusing focusing only on the new elements, that is increased rate of energy savings, carryover of under and overachievement, implications of the change of the definition of the final energy consumption, energy poverty ring fence, and the share of the energy savings to be achieved among the target groups, and also the changes with regard to Annex 5, that is derogation as regards energy emergency regulations, interactions with EU ETS and free allowances allocation, and fossil fuel exclusion. So please watch out, it's coming next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Edita. I think that would be a very nice summer reading to get prepared for the implementation of the new directive. Coming back to the topic of today, so Sam already explained how the revision of both directives have been done to ensure synergies. We have seen the examples from regulation on non-residential buildings, financing schemes for residential buildings. From your point of view, so from the side of the Commission, what would you like to highlight about the possible synergies between the two directives, and especially between the EPBD and Article 8 EED?
Thank you very much for this question. Out of the actually four main aspects of the interlinkages between Article 8 EED and EPBD, I would like to focus on specifically one that, in my opinion, the links are the most timely, I would say, and also mutually reinforcing, and this is the standalone fossil fuel boilers financial incentives ban under EPBD, and exclusion of the energy savings from direct combustion of fossil fuels to be accounted under Article 8. These are like brand new novelties brought by both pieces of legislation. Let's not forget that they are strongly in line with our overall decarbonization objectives and transition away from the fossil fuels. And for both objectives, the first step is, it was also underlined by Sam in his presentation, is to end public policies support to the fossil fuel combustion. At the same time, of course, both are designed to avoid locked-in investments and stranded assets effect in the future. If I may go quickly through synergies, that's just to underline what is the most relevant from from my perspective. The scope of the exclusions in relation to the fossil fuels in both directives is slightly different. As we know, EPBD speaks about the standalone fossil fuel boilers, whereas EED recast concerns the direct combustion of the fossil fuels. And this scope goes beyond the residential sector and encompasses also other sectors like transport and industry. So the scopes are slightly different, and but the timelines maybe are not exactly the same, but they also go in the same direction, and maybe they don't go exactly the same trajectory, because there is time difference also between the adoption of one and the other piece of legislation. So if you allow me quickly to go through it, because well, time is it's already counting for the fossil fuels exclusion under Annex 5 EED. So as of 1st of January 2024, in EED recast, savings from the direct combustion of the fossil fuel technologies are not eligible to be accounted under Article 8 EED for the policy measures also newly implemented as of 1st of January 2024. Whereas as under EPBD, as of 1st of January 2025, financial incentives for the standalone fossil fuel boilers will have to be stopped. At the same time, as of, well, a little bit later, as of 1st of January 2026, policy measures subsidizing the use of the direct combustion fossil fuels technologies in residential buildings as from 1st of January 2026 are not eligible under EED, regardless of whether the policy measure is newly implemented or not. But in a way, this subsidy scheme would not be possible as of 1st of January 2025 in accordance with EPBD. The situation, as I mentioned, is slightly different for other sectors, notably the industry, where there is a specific derogation. And under certain conditions listed in Annex 5, savings can be accounted up until 2030 for the newly implemented measures as of 1st of January 2024. To sum up, even if both directives present slightly different approach to transit away from the fossil fuels, they both contribute to our overarching goal, that is gradual phasing out of the public policy support to fossil fuels and reaching our decarbonization objective. Thank you.
No, thanks a lot, Edita. I think that was very useful to have these clarifications, because indeed there are several provisions going in the same direction but spread in different legislation with different deadline. So a summary is very useful here. I've seen that Sam had some questions to Joost in the Q&A panel. So if you want to continue on that, Sam.
Thank you, Jean-Sébastien. Well, I think there's a couple of questions really, first of all, around compliance, which are quite interesting, I think, for others to hear about. So one relates to the importance of the financial sector that you mentioned. So from what I could tell in your presentation, the financial sector seemed to be almost acting as an additional compliance agent, at least at the point at which new finance was required by the building owner for whatever reason. It might be for making a building renovation, or it might just be to refinance a loan. I guess my question is, I mean, maybe it's more of a point than a question, but I suppose the question might be related to the extent to which that financial compliance still requires the compliance activities of the municipalities to at least be credible. They can't just reduce their compliance activities to zero because the financial sector will be acting, because then if the financial sector knows that you don't have to comply, then they probably won't also require that when they're making their loan requirements. So I just thought maybe you just want to sort of expand a little bit on that, because I think other countries might be quite interested in this role of the financial sector, and maybe what your thoughts are on what that implies for public policy or sort of joining up across stakeholder groups.
Well, thank you, Samuel. I think you're absolutely right. We did not expect a large role in enforcement from the financial sector. As it played out, there was a big role that day, not for strict enforcement, but from the perspective that they would not finance a deal or refinance a loan if there was not a plan at least, or already a label, say, in place. Of course, for the bank, that's just a question of risk management, I guess. So you're right that that will only work if also the banks believe that the municipalities will start to enforce. And second thought on that is that for offices and financiers, then you would have to have a transaction, or at least a loan to be renewed or something like that. And when a building does not change owner, or is not re-rented, or doesn't have have to be refinanced, then there's not a rule for the financier. And maybe for offices that would happen a little bit more often than, for instance, if we look at the future maps, Article 9, we also have to have maps for instance, hospitals. I'm not quite sure, but I don't believe hospitals in the Netherlands get sold and bought that often. So probably in some other sectors, the enforcing role of financiers would be a little bit less big.
Thank you, Joost. And then just so a follow-up question then related back to the EED actually, and how you monitor the results from policy measures that are implemented and enforced at municipal level. Just really interested in how you kind of collect the information in a consistent and coherent way that enables you to then report at national level. Is there some kind of database, or what's the process for collecting the data?
Yes, well, I have to diversify my answer in two parts. First, reporting for EED 8 or EED Article 8, I don't know much about. I don't know. There's different colleagues that work on that. What I do know quite a lot about is the monitoring that we do for the Ministry of the Interior, and then once a year they send a letter to Parliament about how things are going with a bunch of laws that we have in place for energy savings in the building sector, and we tell Parliament about how label save for offices is going. And the way we monitor that is that we have a national building database, the BAG, which is not totally up to date. For instance, if an office building changes its destination and it's no longer an office building, but people are living inside the office building, and now it's a housing because it has transformed into housing, into apartments. Then in the national building database, it's not always changed at the same time as well. There might be a delay, or it might not have been changed. So we still think it's an office. By now it's apartments. We still think that it has to comply with the label say. It's not an office, so it does not have to comply. So the national database on buildings is a little bit of an issue. Of course, it's not that bad, but could be better. And on the other end, we have the database for all our energy labels, which is, as far as I know, totally up to date and totally correct. And so if we combine those two, then we can see which offices we believe have to comply. Now we have a database which are our monuments, and we throw them away out of the database. And in such a way, that's how we make our estimates of how much compliance we have.
Thank you, Joost. Very interesting. Cheers.
I will take over, Sam, if I may, and come back now to the presentation from Natalie. I think probably I'm not the only one among the participants to be impressed by your graphs with the strong increase from 2023. So maybe there are two questions here. The first one is whether this level that you reached in 2023 was also higher than what you had before 2019, because you mentioned that there was a slow start in the new period. So maybe you had the same before, and you had also a high level maybe in 2018, for example. And the second point is how is it managed by the building professionals? Maybe either ups and down, or to have this strong increase, and do any bottleneck? Do you see any bottleneck or to any shortage on the side of the suppliers of building renovations?
Yes, thank you for the questions. As for the first one, I'm sorry that I don't have the number before what I have shown you, but the new Green Savings Program is a cornerstone for the Czech Article 7/EED /8 EED for quite a long time. So there was a substantial amount of savings which come from the new Green Savings Program. Right now, I think we see a surge a bit because, as I have mentioned, there is the way that our colleagues are expanding, basically. the eligibility for the new green savings program, everything is in one place. Everything is easier because beforehand, in the previous period, we had, for example, apartment buildings were not part of the new green savings program. They were part of a different program. So new green savings program was only for single family houses. Right now, everything is in one place. So it's much easier for everyone to know where to go. Also, another aspect I will underline is really the focus on quality of the renovations. That doesn't mean that you cannot do partial renovations, but the more quality, or therefore the more savings you bring, the more money you will get. Plus, there is the bonus structure I have mentioned. As for the availability of workers and materials and technical assistance, I think that those three cornerstones or three pillars, as I would say. With the technical assistance, there is never enough of energy experts. That's why we have this huge reform. That's why we are trying to use digitalization a lot. So a lot of things are basically, we are forwarding them. So you don't need expert who knows, who has a construction education. You don't need that expert to fulfill for the person the application to the new green savings program. That can do someone who is less qualified. So we are trying to move away from that. So really the experts are focusing on what is needed to be, and we are trying to get more experts to help us, basically. So those are the main things. We are going to create one-stop shops, because even though we have ECIS, it's called ECIS centers in Czech Republic, and they are for free, so they are for everyone. We want to build a bigger one. So we would have one-stop shops, then we would have the ECIS centers as they are now, where we have also centers which are on wheels, basically, because so you can call an expert to come to you. You don't have to go to the expert, basically. And we are adding the whole structure of people who are helping with the application. So that's for the technical assistance. As for the materials, of course, we saw a surge in prices. And that is also very similar to the workforce, where we saw that there is not enough workforce to qualified workforce, I would say, because that's also very important. And we are trying really to help with that as well. But those are such a big problems which are connected to migration when the workforce really is concerned. So it's a whole new problem, basically, that we are not qualified. We are just trying to push the proper authorities to start dealing with. And for the materials, I think there was a surge. Now the prices are coming a bit down. But of course, if we are trying, or if we are supposed to achieve what the EPBD says, and consequently what the EED says, we will need so much more for the prices which are available. So that is not the hindering point. In the end, it won't be that people don't want to do it, or we don't want people or let the people to do it, and it will be some administrative burdens on our side. It will be really that we don't have enough materials, or the materials are really expensive. So that's something we all have to think about, and that what the renovation strategies also will be for, to really think hard and think deep. I'm sorry, I'm talking very long, so that's it for me.
No, thanks a lot, Natalie. I think indeed some reality checks are needed to make sure that we anticipate this risk. And I see that some want to react on that.
Well, no, really super interesting points, Natalie. And I actually had a couple of other questions that related to your presentation. So They're not particularly related to each other, but I might ask them together. So first of all, you mentioned that the savings are measured, and I wondered what you meant by that. Is that you actually use metered energy consumption and compare that before and after, or is it that you're looking at kind of EPC type metrics for the the kind of EPC value for expected consumption for an average occupant of a building, and comparing that before and after? So that was one question by what you meant by measured. And then my second question is sort of, again, looking at that very impressive chart that was going upwards and noting that the new green savings is funded through ETS revenues. And of course, we have the new ETS2 coming in. So revenues will increase from, and all of the allowances will be auctioned. So there'll be more auction revenues. And of course, then there'll also be the social climate funds, which are funded in part also from ETS2 revenues. And they will have to be directed towards support for groups, priority groups, to at least in part make building renovations to buildings, which will have, so there'll be extra funds available through social climate funds. So my question really is what that all implies for the future of the new green savings program. Are you hoping to absorb these new funds within the new green savings program, or do you foresee other programs coming along at the same time to operate alongside the new green savings program?
Yes, thank you, Samuel, very much. As for the measuring the savings, we use the EPC's metric. So there is the comparison before and after. That's as close as we can get, really, without some kind of other very administrative burdening things. As for the second question, yes, the new green savings program is using the revenues from EU ETS right now, also through modernization fund, which is right now the pillar, the money pillar for the new green savings program. Social climate fund, we are actually right now discussing what to do with that money, because Czech Republic doesn't have definition of energy poverty and vulnerable households. We are currently working on it, so it really clicks together and makes sense. The new green savings program is using different definitions of low-income households, senior citizens approach at this point. So there is the element of vulnerable and low-income households and people that can apply via new green savings program. And it is true that social climate fund can really work via the architecture of new green savings program, because as I have mentioned before, it doesn't really make sense to be spreading the subsidy programs umbrella, let's say. So there is more and more subsidy programs. We are trying to condense that to one place, that the residential, if you are a person who lives somewhere or you own residential buildings, you know where to go. So that's really the focus where we want to go. Of course, in the social climate fund, especially, there is something which we are talking more and more. It's about tenants. What tenants are supposed to do? They do not own the building, so perhaps the social climate fund will go that way. But as I said, we are currently discussing that, and we have a lot of groups, and we talk a lot about it. So I hope that the result will be equal to the time we already spent on these discussions.
Thank you, Natalie. I've got some more questions for Joost as well, Jean-Sébastien, but
I see we
passed
the time, yes, also. So maybe just before concluding and also making the link, I had also other question to yours, but okay, maybe we can manage that by email or another time. I will have a last question to Edita that will also make the link with the webinar we have next week on energy poverty. So we know that both energy poverty and also tackling worst performing buildings are two key aspects in both directives, in the EED and the EPBD, but we also know that it has been addressed, let's say, in different ways by member states up to now. There are some upcoming reporting by member states to the Commission with the final update of the NECP. Next year, there will be also a new round of national energy and climate progress report. Do you expect some strong developments in these fields? I know that the Commission has already assessed the draft NECP updates.
Thank you very much, Jean-Sébastien. Maybe I will quickly start from the previous reporting on, under NECPR. So for 2023 NECPRs that were covering year 2021, already 20 member states mentioned at least one of the policy measures or group of measures is contributing to energy poverty alleviation. However, only 12 member states reported an amount of energy savings related to energy poverty alleviation. Therefore, although we might consider that these numbers maybe are not very as high as we would like to see, however, it has to be said that reporting under Article 8, paragraph 3 has not been mandatory up until EED recast enters into the force. And up until now, as we see, even though it was not mandatory, member states already have been reporting energy savings achieved among energy poor households and vulnerable groups. Therefore, we hope to see this number increased when the reporting with the reporting in 2025. But we have to bear in mind that reporting in 2025 will cover years 2022 and 2023. Therefore, technically, mostly years still before the EED recast came into the force and the mandatory requirements related to energy poverty. But as I said, although not mandatory, many member states have already been reporting. So hopefully, as years pass, this reporting is less heterogeneous and is increased. For NECPs. For a draft final updated NECPs, the Commission conducted the assessment last year, and indeed, for the draft NECPs, vast majority of member states still need to set out clear objectives and the method for the definition and assessment of vulnerable households, as most of NECPs still lack structural policies and measures to alleviate energy poverty. However, in order to mitigate it, there is still time. The final deadline for the final updated NECPs is 30th of June 2024. So only after the 30th of June 2024, we will see to which extent member states have taken Commission assessment into account. But yes, indeed, we hope to see an increased number of measures included in the final updated NECPs. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Edita. I don't know, Natalie and Joost, if you want to say a final word before we close the webinar.
Thank you for having us.
No, thanks to you. I thank the four of you to join us and to share your views today. I think that's very important now that we see all that is going ahead of us in terms of implementation, transposition, and so on, that we can benefit from the experience of front runners. as Edita said, there is no time to lose now because 30th of June comes soon. So we will let you go back to your work, and yeah, we keep in touch. There will be further publications soon on the ENSMOV PLUS website. So, and for sure, with our social media channels, we will let you know as soon as the new guidance note announced by Edita is available as well. So stay tuned, and have a good afternoon. Thanks a lot to all of you.
Thanks, Jean-Sébastien.
Bye.
Thanks, Joost. Thanks, Natalie. Thanks, Edita.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.